You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lipp, the marketing manager at Stimulus Technologies, and I am here with Nathan Whittacre, Stimulus Technologies CEO and founder. And today we are going to be talking about a subject that we have brought up a few times, but we're going to dive in to see what's new with it, and that is MFA, multi-factor authentication, and what businesses really need to know. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Sherry, and welcome everybody to the podcast today.
So we have talked about this. Why do we keep talking about multi-factor authentication, Nathan?
So, the security researchers continue to say that multi-factor authentication is the most important way to protect accounts. So, having MFA, Microsoft did a research study a few years ago, and it still holds true today that the best way to protect accounts is to set up multi-factor authentication. And this goes on all kinds of accounts, whether it's your business accounts, such as Microsoft 365, or your bank accounts. It could be, personal social media accounts. You want to protect your identity and your access to those accounts, and the best way to do it is with multi-factor authentication.
So a lot of people find it annoying, but why is not setting up strong passwords enough?
Well, a couple of reasons why. Strong passwords are good and a required component of MFA, but passwords can be compromised. They can be stolen, like by a keylogger, which is a piece of software that hackers install on your computer and can capture your password. A lot of people don't use password managers, and so they may use the same password on multiple sites. And so if one site gets compromised and the passwords are stolen, that they use those passwords to log into other locations. So, for example, somebody shared a story with me over the weekend that one of their personal accounts was hacked, and they used the same password to log in to other accounts, things like Walmart, social media. They tried to purchase things using these online accounts, and so it caused a huge disruption for them because they used the same password on multiple sites. So, just having a complex password, especially if you reuse the password, is not a good enough security mechanism. One other point that I want to make on that is you are trusting the site that you're putting that password in, that they're storing that password securely. And there's been, even today, been multiple issues of websites that store passwords in plain text rather than encrypted. And if they store that password as text in their databases, then if a hacker gets into that database, they have the list of all the passwords. I think most companies now are doing a better job at storing passwords encrypted, but I worry that that's going to be a future problem because companies are using AI to code. And if you have somebody that's doing what we call vibe coding or using AI to code, and doesn't have security as a mindset, AI may just generate a system that stores passwords in plain text. And there's nobody looking over that code that knows enough about security to protect it. So you should not trust that these third party websites or programs are keeping your password secure. And so, having different password for each location is essential, plus also having multi-factor authentication so you have some other type of credential to get into the websites beyond just a single password.
So AI is giving us just enough, kind of like when you know just enough to be dangerous. So because we can, people are you saying people are doing it?
Yeah, that's probably the problem is a number of people that I've talked to recently are saying, hey, I use, this AI coding system to develop, a new website for my company or a new CRM or, these new tools. And they have no concept of programming technology or security. They don't have a third party firm that's checking the security on the systems, and they may publish these tools into the real world, and the data storage behind it may leave those accounts very susceptible for hacking. there's I think more concern from a security standpoint today about systems that are coming online, just because I think there's less security that's going to come out of this vibe coding or AI coding than there has in the past.
And do you find that people are using the same passwords across business and personal accounts, like employees or business owners?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's hard to remember multiple passwords, and maybe some people, employees are like, "Oh, I have my business password and I have my personal password," but it's like one password, or one password for each, and then you're trusting the employees, the team members to have good password hygiene, but more likely than not, they're using the same passwords across the board. So, and trying to remember more than one complex password at any given time is very difficult.
It's very difficult. I remember, I mean, we've been using passwords, 30 years, to log into things. And I don't know if the messaging was always have unique passwords for everything, but I remember my first password for work, for my work email was only 4 characters. So that was easy. But besides the password manager helping you with that, how do you teach about complex passwords? Because it seems like I said 30 years and people are still using the same passwords.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching a comedy sketch the other day, and it was a recent comedy sketch, and the number of laughs that came out of the audience, but like uncomfortable laughs, were uncanny. And in this comedy sketch, he was talking about, oh, back in the day, we could just have simple passwords. And so, I would put in like my favorite singer, and that's, my password that I use. If it was 4 characters, it might just be like you too, or something. Maybe spell out you or something. So, and then he went on and say, well, now, they come out and said, well, we need more complex passwords and we have to have letters and numbers. And so we will put a 1 at the end of the password. And everybody did it. Like they put a 1 at the end of the password. And they come out and say, well, now you have to have special characters. And so everybody put, oh, the 1 has an exclamation point in front of it, or above it. So I'll put password 1 and then an exclamation point. Now that's my fancy password. And then they require capital letters and lowercase letters. Well, I'll just capitalize the first letter. And the audience in this room was laughing uncomfortably because probably everybody did that, used a 1 at the end and then put an exclamation point, or maybe they got complicated and used a 4 and a dollar sign instead of 1 and an exclamation point. They're special. But the hackers know that. I mean, in these routines of guessing password, they'll run through and have ran through everybody's way of generating complex passwords, because us as humans, we're not going to remember 16 character multi complex letters and numbers and uppercase and lowercase. And even if we use passphrases, it's hard to remember a long password. So it's important to have a password because it is something, and it's important to have it complex, and that's why we use password managers. But having both gives you not just double the protection, it's an exponential amount of protection, because now you're matching something you have, such as an app or some type of key. Or if you watch my weekly tech jokes, your blood sample when logging in, but something you have to log into the system. And that between the two of those, it's an exponential increase in protection. It's an essential part of the security mechanism today.
Passwords and MFA obviously tied together. Password, like my password manager, at least on my personal accounts, uses Passkeys. And so it's not even me putting in passwords anymore. Is that a form of MFA?
It is, because it's requiring, with the passkeys, it's requiring some type of biometric input to unlock the passkey. And at one point there was a exchange of tokens. A token is like an encryption mechanism between the two locations, and that token is stored and only can be unlocked by that biometric. So the token kind of becomes the password, and your biometrics becomes the MFA. So you have the combination of the two of those once that authentication system is set up. So passkeys have become, I think, an important part of security, because it does provide multi-factor authentication type protections without having to have the password as part of it because you have the unlock of the biometrics. Usually, like if you're using your phone, you're either your thumbprint or your unique face to be able to log in. And those are highly unique. And they've done a good job on preventing, again, fingerprint scanning or visual recognition with the cameras and the three-dimensional pictures that they create. It's very hard to trick those systems.
And so for MFA, are there methods you like better for businesses as opposed to personal? Like what forms of MFA do you like the most?
I think the most important thing is to eliminate friction. It should be easy enough that people will use it. I think that's the first way. So, if it becomes too complicated, then people are going to try to figure out a way around it. So, ideally, like something like a fingerprint scan is, I think, a really good form of MFA because it's something that can be done quickly. So ideally, I would take fingerprint scanning above, the apps. There's sometimes some friction with the app authentication on the phones. There might be too many steps. Maybe employees don't want to use their personal devices, like their phones, to have the MFA app on it. But I think that's the other way. I think if biometrics like visual facial recognition or fingerprints aren't available, then move to the app. And I think the one I like the least is text messaging MFA, and I know that's really common today, but it has been known to be you can intercept text messaging. So that would be my concern with in complex systems, the text messaging multi-factor authentication. The other one that I don't like as much anymore, and I think banks are still using this, is verbal recognition, because voice can be reproduced pretty easily with AI now. So I would prefer to stay away from verbal and multi-factor authentication. So sometimes if you call up your bank, they'll do a voice recognition and say, "Oh, I detect that it's you, it's your phone number, your voice," and then you can get in. But I prefer some type of app, or again, biometrics is better.
Methods can people use? Let's say it's a business and somebody's like, well, I don't want to use my cell phone for MFA. But it's a computer. You can't use your fingerprint or something like that. Are there ways around that? How do you implement it without requiring an employee to have something?
So we've run into that issues with some of our clients. There are these things called FIDO keys. They are like little USB keys that are a second form of MFA. So you put your password in, and then you have to plug in your USB thumb drive or have some type of card that you scan against a scanner on the machine. So that's another way to do it. I see that actually in locations that have one-to-many devices. So think of like nurses stations in hospitals. I see that a lot. Or, car dealerships where there's many mechanics working in a shop area. So rather than having, app that they log into, especially, thinking about the clean environment of the hospital, you don't want the nurse pulling out their phone and having to touch this phone and have to re-scrub their hands. A card, that's on some type of lanyard, is a lot easier. So whether it's fingerprint or USB key or some type of, a card, that's still MFA because it's something you have combined with something you know. So the password is something they know, and then the card, the USB key, the fingerprint, that's something that they have. So that combination works.
And I imagine there might be secure locations where people can't bring in a personal cell phone or something like that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And in those instances, something like, again, biometrics, retina scan, fingerprint scan, something that they have, or, key card along with a password, is probably the best method for that.
And really quick before we get into like how businesses can approach this if they feel like they're behind on getting this set up, have you ever run into a case where a company has hired identical twins or something like that and the facial recognition that wouldn't work?
That's a good question. I actually have not run into that. I've not done research on whether identical twins would trick a biometric MFA. I don't know. That's a good question. So leave it in the comment. Do a little bit of research and sleuthing for us, and leave it in the comment and let us know what you guys found.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody out there has tested this out somewhere. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I like literally just thought of that right now. So if a business is, talking to you about what's best for them, how do you approach it?
I think is to start with what they have. Do they have any MFA enabled on all their devices? Probably the discussion too is a password manager. Are they using any password managers across their locations? If they don't have any of that set up, we would start by the primary location would be their 365 environment if they're using Microsoft, or Google if they're using Google for their apps. I think the email is the first and most important place to start because that's where identity theft occurs generally first, is in their emails applications. So the first thing we would do is enforce multi-factor authentication across all users in their email system. So again, Microsoft 365 or Google if that's what they're using, and ensure not just like we enable it on the accounts, but there's settings in there that we can enforce any new accounts have multi-factor authentication set up. And this is a process. We have to go around, train the users on it, make sure that they have the apps. Everybody has that ready to go. If there's people that don't have the ability to have the apps, find alternative ways of doing it, like hardware keys or fingerprint scanning, like what we talked about. And then once that's done, I would go on and recommend implementing the password manager as the next step, and then talking about all the other systems that they have, their line of business applications, banking websites, other locations, and start enforcing MFA on those areas. So it is a bit tedious because there's a lot of accounts that users have. I know this isn't part of the discussion either, but follow up with discussions about shared passwords or shared accounts. And a lot of companies have, maybe there's a controller and an accounting person that log into their bank account, and either separating those accounts out or setting up password manager that you can share passwords securely between multiple users. So it's conversations around that and storing passwords securely and not in just spreadsheets that are on shared drives. It's a bit of a process to get this going, but we start with identity theft potentiality first and go to their email systems and then start tackling it one system at a time.
And of course, if anybody has questions about this, we invite you to call us. And I'm actually trying out putting up where you can go on our website right now. It's scrolling along the bottom of the screen. So you can visit that, but I will put the link also in the description.
That's great. Yeah, we'd be happy to
Nathan?
have that discussion with anybody that is thinking about this, how to implement it. We can just discuss it with you guys and see what makes the most sense for your organization.
All right. Well, thanks, Nathan. Thanks for the info. And if you liked this, please, if you're watching on YouTube, please give it a like and leave us a comment.